Uh, I call the Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs to order. Time is 3:31. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, briefing with the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. I would like to thank the witnesses for being here today. I understand they have a very busy schedule, and I'm sure the information we'll receive will be appreciated. In the first hour, we'll be hearing from witnesses. Is it Rai Morin, Director?
Correct. Yep.
National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. And Cynthia Wisely Eskimo, is that correct? Eskimo? Okay, sorry about that. She's Vice Provost, Aboriginal Initiatives, Lakehead University. Welcome. Okay, witnesses will have approximately 10 minutes submissions, and we will then take questions from the committee members. So, in the final last minute, I'll notify you that I have 1 minute left to end your submission. Okay, you may start.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for having us. Good afternoon. My name is Rai Moran. I'm the Director of the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation located at the University of Manitoba. I'm joined here today by Dr. Cynthia Wisely Eskimo, Vice Provost, Aboriginal Initiatives at Lakehead University. Cynthia is also a member of the Center's Governing Circle and is an intergenerational survivor. The Governing Circle ensures we approach our work in a respectful and appropriate manner and provides excellent guidance to the Center. In the next 10 minutes, I intend to bring remarks on both the activities and mandate of the Center, in addition to concluding with some thoughts and observations on the efforts of reconciliation broadly underway across the country. Je vais présenter en anglais, mais vous êtes libre de...
I'll be making my presentation in English, but please feel free to put your questions in French as well.
I will give you a little more information on myself. I'm Métis of the Red River Métis. I was raised in Victoria, BC, and relocated to Winnipeg in 2010 to work for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So with this, I'll turn to the mandate of the Centre. The mandate of the NCTR is derived from the Indian Residential Schools Settlement Agreement. This was the broad agreement that established the Common Experience Payment, the Independent Assessment Process, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and now our organization. The Centre was awarded to the University of Manitoba and its partners by the TRC on National Aboriginal Day 2013 after a lengthy consultation and call for proposals process. We carry all statements, all documents, and other materials collected by the TRC. In addition to this, we also carry a number of significant responsibilities related to education, ensuring the material and survivor statements find their way into the hands of educators and students across the country, in addition to ongoing public education activities, research, stimulating new insights into our history through the use of the collection while also continuing to advance understandings of reconciliation, and lastly, community and survivor engagement. While the archives are the foundation of our work, our forward-looking mandate places us at the center of many conversations on reconciliation. We hold the TRC's Eagle Staff, the ceremonial rattle for missing children, and the vessel that carried the sacred ashes from fire to fire across the country. Startup of the Centre, without a doubt, has been challenging, as while we take on responsibility for the issues above, we have also gone through the wind-down of the TRC, the transfer of documents and responsibility between the TRC and our organization, and finally the startup, staffing, and related activities necessary to build a new national institution. That said, I'm pleased to draw your attention to a number of significant accomplishments of the Centre. In November 2014, we moved into a freshly renovated building on the University of Manitoba campus. This high-profile heritage building on the banks of the Red River is intended to mark the deep commitment of the university to the Centre. As a former home for a number of university presidents, it also reminds us that the creation of a sense of home is what is asked of all of us in this work of reconciliation. That we must help rebuild those homes and families attacked and hurt through the residential school system, while making every effort to ensure Canada is a safe place for Indigenous peoples. In November 2015, we officially opened our doors and launched the public databases of the Centre. The launch of these databases marks the first time that site-specific information on every residential school is available in one place. Information on the schools is combined with close to 20,000 photographs in addition to thousands of hours of survivor statements. We launched this database as part of a two-day opening ceremony at the university and Winnipeg Convention Centre. We were thrilled to launch this to close to 2,000 middle and high school students with over 350 educators from across the province of Manitoba as part of a province-wide education day on residential schools. We launched as students because this is what survivors asked us to do, to ensure their statements and histories got into the hands of young learners so that we as a country could never again repeat the terrible failings of the residential schools. Since that point, we held a subsequent Education Day in Regina, again with thousands of students attending. I'm also pleased to say that we ran a very inspiring initiative recently entitled Imagine a Canada. This National Essay and Art Initiative saw Indigenous and non-Indigenous students from kindergarten to post-secondary levels share their vision on the future of this country through a lens of reconciliation. His Excellency Governor General David Johnston hosted the top 10 students at Rideau Hall in a ceremony involving many of the TRC's honorary witnesses and other dignitaries from across the country. We were also successful in bringing together representatives from ministries of education and teachers' federations across the country for a focused workshop on implementing the calls to action on education. This meeting was intended to lay a foundation for a national reconciliation education framework and included individuals such as former Prime Minister Paul Martin and education partners such as the Canadian Teachers Federation and the Council of Ministers of Education Canada. Working in close collaboration with a number of education partners across the country is critical because, as so often stated by Senator Murray Sinclair, education is what got us into this mess, and education is also what's going to get us out of it. Partnership and collaboration generally is woven throughout the fabric of the centre. We now list over 20 national partners that include organizations such as the Canadian Museum for Human Rights and the National Association of Aboriginal Friendship Centres. We are directly partnered with a number of large universities in the country that include the University of British Columbia and Dalhousie, giving the NCTR reach from coast to coast. We are actively building a network of reconciliation-focused researchers that will further enhance the collective understanding and path forward on reconciliation, and new partner institutions continue to join the centre on a near-daily basis. Building and strengthening these relationships is the foundation for a national framework for reconciliation across the country. But through all of this exciting work, we can never forget where the centre derives its original mandate. That original mandate comes from survivors who fought hard to have their voices heard, for the country to be made aware of what they suffered through and experienced in the residential schools. Connection with community and connecting survivors and intergenerational survivors with their records is a critical part of the reconciliation process. To ensure we are able to deliver upon the complex mandate given to us both to protect and to provide access to the information, we work closely with the province of Manitoba to develop the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation Act. And this Act provides us with the tools we need to have to ensure survivors and their families can gain access to the collection when they need to. We also held a series of 18 community engagement sessions across the country, visiting survivors and intergenerational survivors in remote and urban locations to discuss their hopes and dreams of the centre. Central amongst these discussions was an in-depth conversation around privacy and access to the collection of materials amassed. Coming out of these and other discussions has emerged an ever-widening desire for communities, organizations, and individuals to share additional records and materials with the centre. While ambitious, it is not out of the realm of possibility that the centre will grow into Canada's Indigenous Archive, the agency that will hold materials in a respectful manner by Indigenous peoples, for Indigenous peoples, in accordance with Indigenous principles and protocols. But central to the work that lay in front of us all, however, are a few fundamental questions. Where are we going? How are we doing? And will we know when we have arrived? These questions are at the heart of an important conference we are partnering on called Pathways to Reconciliation. This conference, taking place in Winnipeg this June, brings together a diverse audience to discuss three core topics: understanding reconciliation, measuring reconciliation, and implementing reconciliation. Without a doubt, this conference is intended to be a catalyst for a coordinated approach to future national action on reconciliation. This event will be framed also by a soon-to-be-released national public survey detailing perceptions of non-Indigenous peoples towards Indigenous peoples. While not yet released, the report highlights many positive developments, but it also highlights the significant amount of work that's still yet to do in this country. And it is to this last point that I will use my remaining time to make some concluding statements. Friends, the path of reconciliation that lay ahead of us is not a straight line, and it will not be easy. It will take real care and attention in order to bring it about. The TRC issued 94 calls to action in addition to giving us 10 principles of reconciliation. Some of these, such as Call to Action 78, call for core funding for the centre, and I would hope that this call to action is implemented immediately, hopefully. Likewise, calls to action 72 and 76 discuss the need for ongoing efforts to identify and name those children that never returned home from the schools and are buried in unknown locations across the country. This work also squarely involves the Centre. The Centre has begun tracking uptake and activity around each call to action, in addition to laying the foundation for a national reconciliation report on the state of affairs in this country. But without a doubt, there's much, much more work to be done on this front. Through the TRC's work, we have seen the power that survivors' voices have. They have moved this country to a new understanding of who it is and what it is. But even now, we are actively discussing destroying evidence of the abuse that occurred in the residential schools. A recent Court of Appeals decision ruled that all survivor statements given during the IEP process will be destroyed in 15 years following an enhanced notice program. There is an option to appeal this decision before June 3rd to the Supreme Court. Canada supported preservation in the first two rounds, and I will ask that you give serious consideration to an appeal to the Supreme Court. Reconciliation is a national effort, bigger than anything we have undertaken before in this country. It demands that we think of our history and our future in new ways. We need to ask ourselves what information we need to create and track in the present in order to set us up on a path for success. There are a number of specific calls to action that point us in this direction. If we're serious about reconciliation, we need to take real action on establishing frameworks that will allow reconciliation to flourish and succeed. None of us can do this on our own, but it is my sincere hope that through coordinated and committing action, we will look back on this time and be amazed at what we have accomplished. I want to state that we are willing and able to assist in the realization of this national framework. We have the partners, we have the potential, we have the leadership of a fantastic governing circle, and we have the truth upon which our centre rests upon. We have much to contribute from the centre, but we'll need your help in bringing this to reality. Thank you. Miigwech. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moran and Ms. Wesley Esquamo, for your comments. I know the committee appreciates them very much. We're going to move right into some questions from committee members. We have the first round of questions, 5 questions of 7 minutes each. And I'll just be interrupting to let people know when there's 1 minute of that 7 minutes left, and again when it's time to wrap it right up. So we'll move right into the questions, and the first question comes from Michael McLeod, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. This is a really important issue. I represent the Northwest Territories, and I come from a family of 8, and all of us attended residential schools. So this is not an issue that's new to us. Half of the Northwest Territories is Aboriginal, and almost all of them, all the people there are connected somehow to the whole residential school issue that has been getting a lot of attention in the last while. In the Northwest Territories, we probably also have the most people that attended residential school per capita, and this is an issue that is still very recent in our history, in our society. A lot of people that went to school, like myself, are still alive and are still around. But we also have children of people that went to school that are struggling with issues and the fallout of some of the dilemma that was caused and as a result of the residential school. So we're looking at the recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation with a lot of interest, and we're hoping it's going to improve the quality of living in our communities, start moving forward, allow us to build healthier communities, build healthy people, and deal with our many social ills that are challenging us. And I'm glad that we are looking at a centre that would serve as a permanent resource for all Canadians. But I'm not clear how we decided where it's going to be located and how the governing circle is going to be made up of 7 people. And you mentioned in it that you're going to have partners. I'm not familiar with who your partners are and how Winnipeg was decided as the place to host the National Centre.
Thank you. Very important, very legitimate questions. The TRC, in its mandate, which was Schedule N of the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement, was instructed to establish the then called National Research Centre. In 2011, the TRC hosted a significant international conference bringing scholars and practitioners from across the world together to explore what the centre could be, what it ought to be, what it should be, and best practices from across the world. We distilled that conference into a series of questions that we then presented to the country. There was 10 questions that we circulated out in a fairly significant engagement process that asked bidders to tell us what their vision was of the centre, who their partners were, how they were going to pay for it, because the funding is not yet totally certain or clear for the centre, what their experience was in managing very sensitive collections of materials, where they were going to put it. That call for proposals resulted in a number of very strong applications that came in, of which the University of Manitoba and its partners' bid emerged as the winning bid. But without a doubt, this is not the National Centre of University of Manitoba. This is the National Centre of Truth and Reconciliation for the country. And we just happen to have a really great partner that really believes in this and has stepped up to the plate and has provided core funding for the centre, a home for the centre, staffing and resources for the centre, legal help, access and privacy help, that has enabled us to get going out of the gate. Critical amongst this is the continued growth of the network of partners. And partnerships that we have are developed through a series of conversations. We have a legal agreement that's signed between partners. And while I list 20 or so that we have right now, there's a number of other agencies that we work with on a regular basis, including ITK, including AFN, including the national churches, including a whole host of organizations that we're actively collaborating with. And it's through this concept of partnership, of collaboration, that I think the centre is really going to be able to achieve its full mandate. In regards to the question around the governing circle is comprised of 7 members selected from across the country, 3 members representing First Nations, Inuit, and Métis survivors or their families, 2 members representing partners of the centre, and 2 members from the University of Manitoba itself to assist in the administrative discussions and everything like that related to the operations of the centre. We're also just about to create a survivors circle as well, which is another advisory circle that we need to create. And certainly what we see coming down the road is a whole series of other circles, a whole series of other tables, that some of which were created through the TRC's processes and others of which we will need to create in order to bring communities of like-minded individuals together around matters of national importance.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask the presenters about in the event that we lose all funding for the national organization. Now, you have all this information that you've gathered, you compiled, and will continue to gather, and you want to have safe storage place where people can see it. I have 2 questions. First of all, and I've seen this firsthand, and that's why I raise it. In the Northwest Territories, we have 2 institutions, or we had 2 institutions that were set up, Dene Cultural Institute and the Métis Cultural Institute, that gathered all archives of documents, of clothing, and all these things that they set up for presentation.
Just a minute left, Michael.
And the one institution lost all its funding, and they just walked away, left all their product, everything in one room, and when the movers came, they just kind of threw it out the door. I'm really nervous that at some point, if we ever lose funding, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, what it would be the plan to protect that information, and how would we ensure that we have a plan B in the event that...
Critical question. Yeah, thank you for the question as well. Without a doubt, I mean, this is something that is a concern that I share as well. And one of my efforts as the director of the centre is to create as much stability for the centre as humanly possible. This was a concern that was directly addressed in the trust agreement and the administrative agreement that was signed between the TRC and the University of Manitoba, which does bind the university to host this for a duration of time.
We're out of time. If you just wanted to hit one final sentence there.
Yep. And call to action 76 that I referred to is also going to be a good help for that as well. But stability is king. And
Okay, thank you. Thanks both. Thanks for the question. Kathy McLeod, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation and some very important information and updates. I guess my first thing that kind of startled me was, we've heard from the Prime Minister and this government that they have a solemn commitment to implementing the 94 recommendations, and you said you don't know if you've got a budget. I mean, you said this is a recommendation, and you don't know if you've got any budget to do at the important work you've been tasked to do in spite of this promise by the Prime Minister. Is that accurate?
It's a good question as well. So far, we've enjoyed a really strong working relationship with the Government of Canada, and the Government of Canada has flowed money to us in a number of different installments. There was an announcement that was made at the closing ceremonies of the TRC last year of $1 million, with additional funds flowed to us at the end of the year. The one challenge is, as we're starting this organization up, what would be really helpful for us is to actually get the money in advance so that we know what we're actually working with and spend it. Yeah.
So there was nothing in the budget in terms of you having the ability to have a 5-year plan in terms of what you're doing and where you're going. So it's pretty well a big void then.
It remains uncertain at this point. I believe there's general goodwill, but certainty around this is truthfully going to help me sleep better at night.
Thank you. My next question, and it relates to the whole issue, you alluded to it quickly, but the whole issue of privacy. I mean, some of this material is intensely private, sensitive. I, have a healthcare background where, the confidentiality of the people who confided in you is absolutely critical. So I want you to maybe flesh out to me in a little bit better way how you for the people that do not want their story shared, for the people that you don't know if they want their story shared, how are you ensuring the protection of their privacy?
We're taking a very risk-cautious approach to every step that we take in terms of release of any material out of the centre. The material that is found online right now on the centre's database is largely already available in other public sources. We've just made it more accessible, better presented, and easier to find. All of the statements that we find on the centre's website as well are in the public domain and are from the national events or other public hearings wherein they were webcast and survivors were well informed that these were public events with cameras present everywhere. We take the issue of privacy extraordinarily seriously, and this goes right into the actual fabric of how we breathe and eat and sleep at the centre. We don't see this as a collection of material. We see that we've been given a sacred obligation to maintain what we believe is a sacred bundle, and that can and must rest on principles of trust. So we have highly secure databases. We have very limited access to the material. We are fully working with the Access and Privacy Office of the University of Manitoba on a daily basis, ensuring that all of our access protocols and guidelines are top-notch. And we're proceeding cautiously. This is very much a matter of walk before you run. One last thing that I'll say is there is an interesting tension that we do face, though. There's the collective right to know. There's the collective obligation that we have to educate the public and expose the truth of the residential schools. And survivors have a real interest in seeing this. And certainly those community engagement sessions that we had have told us that survivors do not want the truth covered. But there's the individual right to privacy inside of that. So every single record that sits on the centre's website right now is both up there, but we have a button attached to each one that allows a person to request that record be removed from the public domain, and we can pull that record right offline immediately. So we try to have important sort of checks and balances, and that's where the governing circle and other members that we have advising us really help give us
and we work very, very closely with the survivors themselves. I mean, we have elders on the council that are sitting with us who are very clear about what is there, what is released and what should not be released, and how we should approach this, which is why we're also setting up a survivors circle so that they actually have direct input into that. We've had conversations right across the country with people about how do you want to see these documents handled. we understand that, from the perspective of the survivors, there's a lot of information about the survivors. There's not a whole lot of information about the perpetrators here. And, and that's also an issue that people have not really thought about, is the fact that, there's a lot of the other side of this equation walking away without any records actually being handed over whatsoever, or even be in existence. So this is not, in our opinion, and the elders' opinions, just about the Indigenous community. It's about Canada and what has happened over the course of time, and how this needs to be better represented.
I do think you have a very challenging balancing act there, and there's a lot of issues that I think need to be very carefully sort of worked through. This is just out of quick curiosity. How big is the center? How many square feet? You said it was the home of the prior president?
Yeah, so the current center that we have is a beautiful space. It's about 8,600 square feet. It's an old home. We are seeing ourselves grow out of it quite soon, and we have an active fundraising campaign that has already been launched through the University of Manitoba's Front and Center campaign to build a new and dedicated space. We already have land secured for that building, and that's something that we're going to be moving into as we move out of the startup phase as soon as possible. Current staff right now is about 15, 17 people, depending on how you count it, between full-time and part-time people, with additional growth coming in this future year, as we've been able to create some stability around budget, and we understand how much capital and revenue we're actually working with. And that's been one of the challenges through startup, is just understanding how much operating cash we have, and something that I'm definitely trying to secure and stabilize in the immediate.
Just 40 seconds, if you can use it. Okay. Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you.
The next question is from Charlie Angus, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming here, and thank you for your excellent work. I want to start off talking about St. Anne's Residential School. Edmund Matata-Wabin, one of the spokespeople for the survivors, says that the suicide crisis in the young, there's a direct highway to the trauma inflicted in that institution. Next week, St. Anne's survivors will go back to Ontario Superior Court again over the fact that the federal government of Canada suppressed thousands of pages of police testimony, kept the names of over 180 perpetrators hidden, and lied in hearings and denied people their right to justice. Justice Perel ordered those documents to be turned over. Have they been turned over to your center? Do you have all the documents that relate to the St. Anne's police investigation?
We've continuously been in the challenging position that we only really know what we've received, and we only really know what we're allowed to see, kind of thing. So we have received a fairly significant production of materials related to the OPP investigations. Off the top of my head, and this is just round numbers, I believe it's about 13,000 documents or so in unredacted form that came into the center. Of course, these are highly sensitive documents that need to be treated with the utmost of care and concern. Whether there's more documents, to tell you the truth, I don't know. But
redacted.
They are not redacted.
They are not redacted.
Yeah.
Well, see, this is the interesting thing. The federal government's been blocking me for 3 years finding internal government documents, nothing to do with St. Anne's, and yet they gave me a document dump that included documents they were refusing to turn over to claimants, and they were not redacted. So they sent me names of witnesses, names of perpetrators, names of who was involved in the abuse, and yet the survivors are going into hearings against the federal government, and those names are being blocked out. So I just don't understand why you would have access to the names while those who are trying to get justice for the federal government are being told that they have no right to see the names of the perpetrators, as though the government is protecting the perpetrators in these hearings. So you have unredacted versions.
That's correct. We do have unredacted versions. All of the document production that happened to the TRC was in unredacted form, which truthfully places a lot of responsibility on us, again, to manage that highly sensitive personal information. But we needed unredacted documents so we could understand the truth and so we could help survivors and everything like that. We are still challenged, though, as we go through our startup and as we build capacity and as we get staffed up. I mean, I would love to be helping those survivors from St. Anne's, in their quest for justice. And we are at once so concerned about privacy that we're worried about missteps. At the same time, there's a question about whether or not we're missing opportunities to really contribute to the overall justice and healing that really needs to take place in the country.
Well, thank you for that. I'm concerned about the destruction of the documents because I hear from people all the time now about their cases being thrown out on technicalities, and I worry that if the evidence isn't there, they're not going to be able to appeal. So under the destruction of IEP documents, would you classify as those the historical records, the school narratives? What about departmental briefings or notes to the minister? Are those classified as IEP documents, or where do we draw the line here?
So the issue that's in front of the courts right now has narrowed the question around IEP document preservation for the purposes of the historical record to 3 general categories of records. Survivor statements / transcripts, applications, and then adjudicator's decision. There are a whole series of records that aren't included in that, and there's a variety of reasons that I won't go into full detail here right now. One would hope, and I don't have direct confirmation of this, but one would hope that the standard multi-institutional disposition authorities that apply to government agencies from Library and Archives Canada would ensure that all of those briefings and the corporate records of the IEP Secretariat would be preserved as any other government record. Right. That was the same with the TRC. We had to preserve our corporate records
Okay,
as well.
so you're saying, say, for example, ministerial briefing notes would not be something that they could claim has to be protected and then destroyed?
It should not be under this decision. I mean, that should be a different sort of line of preservation, and that should fall just under standard government record-keeping process and procedure.
I want to ask about the administrative split where we've had 1,000 cases thrown out. In the case of St. George Anglican School in Chisasibi, very much like St. Anne's, the government obtained new documents over what was termed when it was an Indian residential school, but that information was not turned over to claimants, so their rights to proper hearings were denied. And I understand that Indian Affairs or Indigenous Affairs officials have recently told the IEP Oversight Committee that they'd turned over those documents already a long time ago. Have you received updated narratives of what happened at St. George Anglican School in Chisasibi?
We have not received updated school narratives in recent production, no.
Okay, thank you very much. You have said that the federal government has been silent on this appeal to the Supreme Court about protecting the documents. Now, I recognize the importance of the privacy, and I think you've talked about it as a sacred trust, and this is something that we all are deeply concerned with. But can you explain to me your concern about the destruction of these records and what it will mean for being able to maintain some kind of ability in the future to find out whether justice was actually served under the IEP hearings, or some people may have been railroaded?
Well, I think that is a fundamental question. So one, we have to think about things just in the basic public interest. The IEP process has been a massive disbursement of public funds, and it has been a massive process of justice and alternate dispute resolution that's happened in this country. That in and of itself should warrant scrutiny in the future, period. Both domestically and internationally, because the cold hard reality is we won't be the only country that faces these mass human rights violations, and there's much to be learned just in the administration of the process. Now beyond that though, the IEP records, while incredibly sensitive and while survivor concerns around that sensitivity can and must be respected with the highest levels of respect, provide a window into the residential schools that no other sets of records can do. It is the record of abuse, and anything that I've heard from survivors is that record of abuse is absolutely harrowing. We don't actually fully understand, I believe, as a society, how bad it was in the schools. And here's the scenario that happens right now, is that under this particular decision, the records will be preserved for 15 years while a notice program goes out and asks survivors whether or not they want to opt into preservation. But that's a pretty high test, truthfully, because you have to track people down, you have to get a hold of them, you have to talk to them, you have to convince them, and survivors are spread across the country. Many of them live in remote areas, there's language barriers, and survivors are also aging rapidly. So what's going to happen is these records are going to get held for the better part of 15 years, which takes us to around 2031, 2032. That's the date. They will have been held. Nothing will have gone wrong with the records. They will have sat silent on some computer server somewhere, perhaps at the center, perhaps at the IEP Secretariat. And somebody is going to have to walk up and hit delete on that entire set of records. And I've thought about what that day looks like, and I would challenge all of us to think about whether or not, as parliamentarians or advocates or Indigenous peoples, you would want to be the one making the speech on that day. And I know I would be extraordinarily conflicted about what kind of speech I would make on that day. Would I say that that was justice
We need
served?
to finish up on.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. But that's the scenario that we're looking at. Sorry.
Okay,
Yeah,
no problem. Thank you,
Yeah.
Mr. Moran. Thank you, Mr. Angus. Don Resnack, please.
So, being an alum of the University of Manitoba, I'm happy to see that the records are there at a great university. I know the building, and it's just a great place to be, especially with the Canadian Human Rights Museum being in Winnipeg. I could see collaboration there. And that's my first question. Has there been any collaboration with the Canadian Museum of Human Rights, or have there been any discussions? And if there hasn't or there has been, what do you see the plan moving forward, working with organizations such as that museum?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. That is one of the truly great gifts that we have being located in Winnipeg, is we've got some fantastic organizations there, like the museum. We enjoy a very close, healthy working relationship with the museum. We've collaborated on a number of initiatives so far, including the display of the Bentwood box, which, although in our collection, sits at the museum. We've provided them with a number of video files from the center's collection. And we are partnering on the Pathways to Reconciliation Conference and a whole series of education initiatives that focus on bringing students through the center and through the museum. You know, that museum is very similar to the process that we're working on with the Canadian Museum of History as well, and getting these survivor statements and materials into public spaces so that people can learn and understand this history is what we have been asked to do and is what the country has been asked to do. So these types of partnerships are extraordinarily exciting for us, and the more we can do them, the more we can work in close partnership and collaboration, the better and stronger we all are collectively.
So I'm a little bit unclear in terms of your funding right now. Your funding is coming from partly the Government of Canada and partly from the settlement?
Our funding right now, up to this point, has come really from 4 primary revenue streams. We had some surplus funds from the TRC, but of course that's dried up because the TRC has now disappeared. We have some core funding from the University of Manitoba, and I really have to acknowledge the contributions that the University of Manitoba has made, because they've stepped up to the plate in the absence really of any other funding that we've had. So real sincere kudos to them. This has been a big project for them to take on. We've had then some funding from the Government of Canada that came through an announcement by then Minister of Aboriginal Affairs, Minister Valcourt, last year, and then topped up with some year-end money at the end of this year. And we've been successful in now starting to raise some other money as well. So the province of Manitoba has contributed some funds, and we've been successful in bringing some corporate money into the centre. All of which means, though, that aside from right now the core funding from the university, we don't have a lot of, checks that we can take to the bank, coming down the line. So that remains a concern for us.
In terms of startup, you're essentially started up right now, or is there still capital expenses and other expenses? You said you're still staffing up, so I'd imagine there's still work to do in terms of startup, and what needs to be done, and how much do you need essentially to get to where you need to be?
It's a very good question. So there's the core activities of the center, and then there's the additional activities of the center. So by the middle of this year, we're going to have the core staff in place that we need. Attracting some of the core staff to the center, it's essential that we've attracted quality staff, and we're just sort of filling in the last number of positions. Then that gets us going at sort of the core operations level. Then there's all the other work that we need to do as well. And that's where we need to sit down and have some serious conversations with a variety of partners and a variety of agencies, least of which is the Government of Canada, to really sit down and plan out what this framework for reconciliation looks like, how we're going to really collectively deliver on these calls to action that have been given to all of us. So we're continuing to build. We're moving out of startup phase, and it's all heading in the right direction.
How much time do we have, Chair?
You've got just under 3 minutes.
Oh, perfect. So I imagine the governing circle has been involved in terms of the direction that the center is going in right now. How has the governing circle, or can you answer this question, how has the governing circle been engaging with First Nation communities, Métis communities, and other Inuit and Indigenous communities across the country right now?
Yeah, the governing circle has been situated. We have different people on that circle that have different skill sets, obviously, but we were looking at the ethical standards, and certainly we were looking at the documentation and how it might be released, and what we would be setting up over the course of time. Each of the governing circle have responsibilities in their own home communities as well, and the expectation is that we would do a lot of that community outreach, and that's been happening. So we've been bringing people into that circle ourselves and ensuring that it's moving forward. I'm an honorary witness on the governing circle. There are at least 100 honorary witnesses across this. That's also our responsibility to ensure that they're also engaged in the work of reconciliation. So our job is to actually not only be there for Rai and advise him and work along with him, but also to talk about where do we need to go next, what kind of circle should be put in place immediately, and how do we keep this alive on the street? How do we get people, to continue to pay their attention to the reconciliation process forward?
So I'm just a little bit unclear as to the structure of the governing circle. I understand there's an individual member from Métis community, First Nation community, and Inuit community, and then you mentioned about survivors that do they have an involvement in that governing circle, and how many people are in that group, and how are they chosen if they do actually have input?
Just 1 minute remaining, please.
Yeah, very good questions. Just briefly, we're very fortunate right now in the sense that the majority of the circle are all Indigenous peoples. We have a mixed blend of survivors and intergenerational survivors and day school survivors, which is critical actually in this whole conversation. This was again a national call for submissions, and a number of our partners. I think we had a 13-person selection committee that include representatives from our partners, National Association of Aboriginal Friendship Centers, AFN, Métis National Council, all that kind of stuff, that participated in the selection of this governing circle, this initial governing circle, which, as the initial governing circle, has also had to work quite hard because as we build it, as we explore these questions and conversations, it also means that we need a lot of good dialogue and advice from trusted people around us.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move into a round of 5-minute questions. These will move a little more quickly. And the first question is from Arnold Vierson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to our witnesses for being here today. It's fascinating to listen to what you're doing. It's great work that you're doing. I was just wondering about perhaps templates. Are you aware of anybody else in the world that's doing something similar to what you're doing?
It's a very good question. There's certainly some parallels down in Australia. They had a process that ran down there. Of course, they're a colonial society, a member of the Commonwealth, wrestling with a number of the same issues that we wrestle with here in this country. They had a Council for Reconciliation that ran for a number of years, which was very analogous to our TRC, and then created an agency that was called Reconciliation Australia, that works on monitoring reconciliation. They issue an annual State of Reconciliation report in the country. They also issue a reconciliation barometer that tracks public perceptions and relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. In addition to working very heavily with the corporate sector on reconciliation action plans, which is actually quite an interesting model. There are other agencies elsewhere in the world that do work on sites of memory and also on monitoring status of reconciliation. In South Africa, there's a dedicated research team that runs the South African Reconciliation Barometer. They've been running that for about 20 years, consistent baseline data on the relationship that is happening in South Africa. We've studied that heavily. There were similar efforts underway in Rwanda. And that's sort of on the reconciliation piece. More broadly, though, of course, as a site of memory, as a center of memory, as a national kind of commemorative institute as well, there's some really interesting organizations out there, like the Shoah Foundation, which is in partnership with UC Berkeley down in California, that holds a very large number of survivor statements from Holocaust survivors, actually. And we studied them and met with them very intensely when we were thinking about where the center should be parked, and explored that relationship between a university and a center in the development of our plan.
this one from Berkeley, how does their funding work? Is it government funded, or is it private donations, or?
They had an initial base that was actually funded by Steven Spielberg. So they tapped into some really big Hollywood money, basically around this, which gave them a really significant head start. And it was one of the things that we talked about at the TRC, like, where's our kind of Hollywood North and all of this? And we don't really have one, I don't think, in the same kind of way. So now I think their funding is primarily foundation funding with a large endowment, basically. And one of the things that we have explored in conversations with the federal government is the creation of an endowment for the center. And you'll see some of the calls to action specifically around the ones that talk about ongoing national frameworks for the measurement and monitoring of reconciliation, talk about the establishment of endowment fund that will give an agency the ability to protect itself from perhaps political winds that shift or up and down revenue streams and all that kind of stuff, because reconciliation and this conversation that we are having has to be stable, and it has to be something that's around for a very long time. So creating these types of stable funding arrangements that allow us to weather the storms that blow are very important.
How much buy-in do you have from, say, First Nation communities in terms of funding, or even survivors themselves? I know, like, just from my own life, there's things that I want remembered. I invest in them directly. Local museums, that kind of thing. I'm a member of that. Is there a membership, or like, can I purchase a membership in your organization? Are all survivors honorary members? How does that work?
That's a good question. We are really operating in the public realm, so we have a direct and vested responsibility to provide this information back to survivors as part of a sincere gesture of reconciliation that really shouldn't or can't have a cost associated with it. We have to remember that Indigenous peoples generally remain fairly marginalized and disadvantaged in society, so it's not really a first stop that we would go for grassroots kind of funding on this. That said, I mean, there are potential cost recovery revenue streams that we certainly explore. So, for example, when we go to provide access to the Canadian Museum of History, one of the things that we're exploring is, if we need to put a researcher on specifically to dig records out of the center, well, then there's a cost recovery kind of model that we can explore there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Messe. Oh, we're going to move along to Gary, please. And Andy Sanford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you both for the very hard work in getting this together and getting it off the ground. I want to get a sense, I know we've spoken extensively about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the call to action. What role do you play in ensuring that the 94 recommendations are monitored and the right parties are involved and engaged in implementing them and kind of reporting back to all of us on its progress?
Thank you. Again, a really good question. I did make some remarks in my opening statements about some preliminary work that we're doing in this field to get some of the monitoring work off the ground. Of course, as we work through the startup phase, we've got a lot of responsibility on our plate, and this is an area that we want to grow into, but perhaps are not able to fully realize quite yet. Reconciliation is one of those things where it needs to be a diverse and diffuse effort, and it needs to happen organically. It needs to happen across all sectors. We have responsibilities as individuals, as organizations, and of course as a nation to engage in reconciliation. But careful conversations around where we are, where we need to go, and how we're going to get there are absolutely essential. And that means, and you'll see some of them in the calls to action, and we're laying the foundation for this also through the center, is amassing important sets of information that we need to understand. So things like, over-incarceration of Indigenous peoples is a really important indicator of right now what is, frankly, still a broken relationship. As we hopefully see these gaps or over-representation start to decline, we can start to say something about reconciliation. but there remain a number of important indicators out there across the country that say that we're not where we need to be yet. Graduation rates from high school, even entry into universities, life expectancy, all remain serious issues. So we do feel that we have a responsibility to keep an eye on this, but this is an area of growth that we need to grow into, and frankly, we're ready to do it. We have all of the irons in the fire. We just need a little more support to actually get there, and then we're off to the races.
Somebody else had something there. Yeah, that's part of it when we talk about the governing circle, about what is it that we do. We obviously have to monitor. There's a number of different areas. So I'm in education most of the time. So I'm monitoring at that level all of across the board, the university presidents. I'm talking to them on a regular basis, and I'm trying to make sure that they've got 17 principles that they've tabled. Let's make sure that they get put in place. I'm meeting with deans at different universities. I'm talking about indigenizing universities curriculum. So there's a lot of work that's going to be going on the ground that has to be done by us. And just getting those records in place and making sure that they're safe is one job that the center has, but the center cannot take on all the rest of these responsibilities without the assistance of other people and other dollars coming from other places. So when we say that this reconciliation process is a Canadian process, we really mean that. It's not about Aboriginal Canada doing this on its own. So we have a lot of responsibility that we take on to make sure that this happens.
It would occur to me that in terms of the recommendations, the calls to action, there really isn't a body that's tasked to independently look at how effective and how much we're progressing. I know it's only been several months, but I do think that task needs to be undertaken by someone apart from government itself. I'm sure government has its own process, but an independent body that can be more objective. So is that something that I think, and I think you probably answered the question, but is that something that you were able to undertake, and what is the extent of the resources you need in order to do that?
Just 1 minute, please.
Thank you. We feel that we're fully able to undertake that, and we're in the redesign of the NCTR's web presence right now. You will see in the near future an initial review of the calls to action and monitoring effort of the calls to action. In regards to what that's going to take, it's certainly going to take more staff than we have right now, and it's certainly going to take a lot of coordination as well, because we need to get a number of tables set up that are actually feeding the right information in. So this is the kind of thing where we need to get some of the people in the right room. We need to go through a full costing exercise on it. We need to get good people together to talk about it, but we feel fully prepped and ready to lead that conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you both. The final question we have time for in this round is to David Utica.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. The TRC is not only focused on the survivors, but also the missing children who do not survive the residential school system. So can you describe the Missing Children Project, and can you describe some of the challenges faced in collecting this information?
Thank you. Very good question. I'm pleased to say that just last week we assembled a group of the researchers, all the stages of researchers that worked on the TRC's Missing Children Project here in Ottawa for an intensive one-day session on what needs to happen next. There are really 3 significant parts of the project that we see being necessary to develop. So there's some work that we need to do that's right in our wheelhouse, which is the establishment of the Missing Children database and online register, and the ongoing discovery of children that did not return home from the schools. That discovery process both involves research within the collection and dialogue with the community. And that's an iterative process, a cyclical process that involves engagement, feedback, tips, and information going out. At the same time, a very significant issue that is facing us as a nation is the lack of identification of burial locations across the country. The preliminary estimate that we have, and this is just preliminary, and don't take this to the bank necessarily, but there's somewhere between 300 and 400 locations that Indigenous children were buried as a result of the residential schools. Many of these are unmarked. Many of these are at risk of penetration of sewer lines or urban development or redevelopment, and this is actually a real concern. Lastly, the community can and must be empowered to have the opportunity to commemorate and to engage in ceremony or healing that they feel appropriate around the burials. And that can and must be led by the community. So some kind of program needs to be established to support them in that healing. And that might take a very simple form in some communities of erecting perhaps a monument or something. Or in other cases, we have to be fully prepped and fully ready to actually think through and explore issues of repatriation, where we may be bringing some of these children home, which in the case of Charlie Hunter, or I believe for many of the Inuit communities where their children were brought thousands of kilometers south, is a significant and very pressing issue for communities.
Well, thank you for that. To date, how many missing children has the TRC identified?
Yeah, I don't have the exact number right at hand, but it's over 3,000 children. But to be honest, we have a lot of work still to do on the uncovery of the records and review of the records. By virtue of how the records came into the center and just the massive onslaught and the timing around when these records showed up, the TRC was simply overwhelmed and wasn't able to review every single record that it wanted to. To frame things a different way, I mean, we're still collecting records right now. We got 1 million records in December of 2015, you know, when the TRC was issuing its final report. So there's lots of information that we haven't reviewed that, and we know that there's going to be additional children that we uncover in those records.
I know to most families that they want to know how they died. Is there any record if they died from disease or through accidents or whatever it may be? Because as a family member, I would want to know too.
That exists. That information exists in certain instances, and the TRC in its initial missing children report did indicate the type of or the nature of death and the reasons for death, but it doesn't exist in all cases. And what we also find is we don't necessarily have names of the students in all cases. So we have a certain number of named students that we can identify, and then there's a large number of students that we know passed away in the schools, but we don't have names. They kind of show up silently, where it's, you know, 3 students died in the school, period, you know, and it's really heartbreaking. And just, you know, really to frame things, I mean, before we had that meeting, I mean, this is the severity of this history that we're dealing with. I mean, we had one of our members from the governing circle come in, Eugene Arcan, and give real remarks. And, you know, I have to say that when we have this conversation around missing children, I mean, it is just such an enormously heavy topic that we talk about. I mean, this is something that the elders talk about giving the opportunity for these children to come home, because literally their spirits continue to walk this land in a restless state where they don't have family around them, and it's really terrible. It's really terrible, and we have to approach this not just of course in a clinical perspective, but really with our hearts wide open to the severity of this history and the ongoing need for healing that we have in this country.
Okay. Yeah, we're all out of time there. Well, thank you both on behalf of the committee for traveling to Ottawa and sharing with us this incredibly important and moving comments. What you shared with us will be folded directly into our work plan, and we look forward to solid action in the future. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
We'll suspend for a minute or two while we have a switchover. Thank you. We'll resume now. Thank you very much. And it's my great pleasure to welcome to the committee today representatives from the Specific Claims Tribunal of Canada, specifically Mr. Justice Harry Slade, the chair of the tribunal, Madam Justice Joanne Mainville, a tribunal member, and also Alyssa Lombard, legal counsel with the tribunal. We have 10 minutes for you to speak today, and what I will do is at about the 9-minute period, I'll raise my hand with a finger like that. That's 1 minute. And then 10 minutes, I'll raise my hand like that just so you can try to finish up. And this is in the interest of maintaining fairness so that everyone has an opportunity to.
It's that figure, Mr. Fillmore.
Okay, that's right, this one.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. And Justice Slade, please, you have the floor.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you for inviting us to attend. Just a little bit of my background. I practiced in the field of so-called Aboriginal law for about 27 years in British Columbia, and something of a nationwide practice. I was appointed to the BC Supreme Court in 2001 and to the tribunal initially in 2008. Now, the Specific Claims Tribunal Act represents something of a conversation between the Assembly of First Nations and the Government of Canada, and the creation of an independent tribunal was a long time in coming, at least 30 years of that conversation. Members of the tribunal are drawn from the superior courts of the provinces, and in particular British Columbia, Ontario, and Quebec. My colleague, Justice Manville, is from the Quebec court. The intent was to ensure the independence of the tribunal, the intent behind real judges becoming members. It was also important to the Assembly of First Nations and other Indigenous stakeholders that we had a standalone department providing us with the full array of corporate services. Now, we got started in consultation with stakeholders to develop our process and our rules of procedure. And we had some early challenges, a lack of effective administrative support and concerns over institutional independence, but we managed to get the doors open in June 2011. Thankfully, concerns over direct administrative support were resolved in time, thanks to an extremely talented corporate head of our sole service provider, the Registry of the Tribunal, a government department under the Ministry of Aboriginal Affairs as it then was. Now we have 76 claims in the inventory, 70 are active. There's been decisions on validity in 11 of those, and there's 5 more coming, that is decisions, in the next week or two. I am not pleased with the pace of progress in the performance of our mandate. One can expect delay in building a foundation for the operation of a new adjudicative institution, but we've been hampered ever since mid-2014, actually earlier, than by a chronic shortage of judicial members, despite 2 annual reports in which I've indicated that the tribunal will fail if we don't get an adequate complement of members. Now, 76 claims may not sound like much when you consider the volume that goes through the courts, but we don't have back-to-back hearings in a single building. We take our hearings to the communities of the claimant, and we all consider that extremely important given that part of our mandate is reconciliatory. It's important that the people that own the claim see who the decision makers are and see the process that we go through, which, by the way, is informal relative to processes in court. So at present, I'm the sole full-time member, and we have a supernumerary judge, Justice Larry Whalen, Ontario Court, as part-time. He's giving us more than he's required as a supernumerary. And of course, we have Justice Manville, who is on a 6-month rotation in and out of the Quebec Court. Now, today there was tabled by the Auditor General a report relating to Governor and Council appointments, and we participated in the workup of that report. I've set out a number of the extracts from that report that tell the story of the frustrations we have encountered. Now, we have volunteers from BC, Ontario, and Quebec Superior Courts. And the way it goes is that a judge will volunteer, and if approved by the Chief Justice of that court, it will be nominated by the Chief Justice. We have Justice Grist, BC, Justice McDougall, Ontario, and Justice Mayer, Quebec, all waiting for appointments, and they've been waiting in some cases for 2 years. One of the major difficulties here is that Chief Justices are naturally reluctant to nominate members from their courts when their own judicial complements are well short of the required number. In fact, it took 4 years after the date that I was first appointed for the Cabinet to give the BC Court a judge to replace me. And as a senior judge of that court, that was a serious matter. The BC Court presently has 9 vacancies. I don't know how many Quebec and Ontario have, but one can only be sympathetic with the concerns of Chief Justices, whose first responsibility is to ensure that the work of the court gets done. So I think that's something that needs to be addressed if we're to operate at a full complement, and it's independent of all of these delays in the appointment of members to the tribunal. I finally received a call from the Chief of Staff of the Honorable Carolyn Bennett last night, having written to her on April 15th to advise that I'd been invited here to speak about these very things. I'm now told that the 3 appointments will be made, and they will be made on an expedited basis. I was told this yesterday, May 2nd, on the eve of the appearance here. The simple fact of the matter is that there are just a few judges nominated for membership on the tribunal for reasons that I've generally canvassed. All qualify as their sitting judges. They represent at this time the pool from which judges are to be appointed to the tribunal. I can tell you there's no personal benefit to a judge who takes an appointment to the tribunal. We continue to receive our remuneration and benefits as if continuing full-time as judges of the courts. So there's no difference other than the burdens of traveling all over the country and spending time in Ottawa, which is a hard sell to judges who live in Vancouver for a lot of obvious reasons. I'm going to ask my colleague, Justice Manville, to speak of the challenges in the Quebec court around appointments.
We may have to hear some of that through the questions. There's just a minute left remaining in your.
Alors, je vais m'exprimer en français.
I'll be speaking French. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for your invitation. I left the courthouse where I was sitting today, and I'll be going back tomorrow because I'll be continue continue to sit because this was an urgent matter. It's important for me to come to speak to you about the particular problems we are facing, and not only in Quebec, but everywhere. I've been with Justice Slade from the very beginning, and we've been working very hard to set up this tribunal. My mandate will be concluding at the end of November. I will no longer be able to sit on this tribunal because it is not possible to renew more than once. Unless there is a change to the legislation, it will be impossible for me to continue to be a member of the tribunal. There is some urgency, as I said, because starting the end of November, there will be no one to represent Quebec if the new members have not yet been appointed. We have files in French, and I'm the only one who is able to consider them. We have someone who will have to deal with the files in Quebec. Is it over? Is that all? Yes.
But we'll hear more through the questioning, I assure you. Thank you very much for your remarks. We're going to move right into rounds of 7-minute questions from the committee members. And as I did with the opening statements, I'll raise a single finger when there's a minute left and a hand when there's no time left, again, in the interest of fairness. The first question is coming from Michael McLeod, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the panel for your presentation. I certainly appreciate the discussion that you bring forward. I'm really interested in a little more information on some of the challenges that you're facing. You flagged a few of them, and I was going to say I'm surprised, but I'm not surprised, I guess, at the vacancies in the council positions. We're seeing this right across the country. We're hearing it from Alberta and judicial appointments. I'm from Northwest Territories, and most of our regulatory boards have not seen appointments in, some of them as long as 2 years. We have a number of boards that have lost quorum and can't function, and it's a real challenge to move forward, and we're really trying to get those vacancies filled in a short time period and in a hurry. Your report, your tribunal's 2015 annual report, outlines a number of a total caseload in a number of areas, jurisdictions across the board. And it also indicates that the report that most, if not all, claims allege a breach of the Crown's fiduciary obligations. Now, I want you to maybe talk a little bit about the distribution of your caseload and any considerations that might be taken into account to ensure that the hearings are accessible to the First Nation peoples from Canada.
Well, thank you for that question, Honourable Member. The distribution of the caseload, and Ms. Lombard is better able to speak to that than me, but generally 50% of the claims come from British Columbia and Alberta, and of that 50%, 75% come from British Columbia, and that's due to the history around reserve creation, which is outside of treaty in BC, and those are fiduciary duty claims. What about the rest of them?
I'd say approximately 11 originate from Quebec, and most, if not all, are in the French language. 2/3 originate Ontario westward, and varying types of claims in those provinces, ranging from alleged unlawful surrenders to unfulfilled treaty promises to agricultural implement claims to illegal disposition claims, most of which, if not all, allege a breach of fiduciary duty conceptualized one way or another.
Thank you. In your opinion, what are the main challenges faced by the First Nations communities that may lead them to allege a breach of the Crown's fiduciary obligations?
Well, with respect to the tribunal, I think the challenges that First Nations face, first and foremost, is a lack of adequate resources to pursue claims before the tribunal. It's turned out to be more costly than I had hoped. Not too surprising in the early days as we're testing, or the proceedings are testing many issues that have previously been untried. And fiduciary law is a developing area of the law in Canada, particularly as it relates to Indigenous groups and Crown responsibilities derived from the precept of the honor of the Crown. We're getting more efficient as we move along, but the length from filing to hearing is far too long. And that is in large measure due to resource challenges that the First Nations claimants have. In part, it's due to our process in that these claimants, though they have been through the process under the specific claims branch of the ministry, have not had any disclosure of relevant documents in relation to their claims. So the starting point for a quasi-judicial process that's at the extreme end of judicial for a tribunal is document disclosure. See, they have their claims rejected by the minister on the advice of the specific claims branch in the Department of Justice, but they get a summary of why, but they don't get disclosure of the material that was relied upon by the minister in arriving at his or her decision not to accept the claim. Well, procedural fairness demands that the claimant, that both parties have access to all relevant documents. So, you know, when they come into our process, they start with conducting historical research. Frankly, the specific claims branch and their lawyers take exception to anything that was prepared in connection with the claim within their offices to disclosure to the claimant. So it's a nonsense proposition in my view, but it's the position they take, so everybody has to start from scratch. We're losing elders, by the way. We've had to adjourn matters or not been able to set matters down for hearing in a prompt and timely way, and in the result, the loss of elders' evidence in the nature of oral history.
Out of time there, Michael, I'm afraid. The next question comes from Kathy McLeod, please.
Thank you, and thank you for an excellent overview. I do actually have to make a quick little comment. I know that there is challenges with the GIC appointment process, but it's not helpful when the new government sends letters to many recent appointments and asks them to step down from their positions. So I do think you know, we need to also acknowledge that sometimes you know, there's processes that aren't helpful as we try and ensure good manpower, but I just couldn't let that ride, sorry. But mostly, this is a quick question, but what would you deem a full complement? Is it mandated what your full complement is?
The Act provides for the appointment of up to six full-time equivalents to be drawn from a roster of up to 18 judges. So the idea is that there be a fairly large pool of judges who can be called upon to serve full or part-time on the tribunal. There was no consultation with the judiciary before the act came into force. Don Brenner, the late Don Brenner, my Chief Justice, called me in my chambers and said, "Hey, Harry, what is a specific claim? So that began judicial education in my court about specific claims and existing processes. In any case, he first learned of the Act and a companion amendment, which was to give the BC court 3 more judges, Ontario 2 and Quebec 1, to offset judicial time dedicated to the tribunal when he received a copy of the Act just before, the bill just before a third reading. So we don't have a roster, really.
They only give me a few minutes, so I'm just hoping I get into my next question. I'm from British Columbia. I'm very familiar with the challenges in terms of British Columbia and the unresolved, the longstanding claim issue. I'm more familiar, of course, with comprehensive process because I've been involved with it, but relatively new to this committee. I see the Williams case, and then I know in my riding there's the Douglas Lake. One is heading down the judiciary path, and they might be looking at how they can resolve that. And I see that the Williams was something that headed down and you issued a decision. So can you flesh out for me a little bit in terms of the Williams going down the path of your process, the Williams decision that you have on your website?
Williams Lake?
Yeah.
Williams Lake, yeah. Well, that is a decision that addressed several of the more complex issues around Crown fiduciary duty, particularly with British Columbia. Now, I expect that they were driven to take the matter to the tribunal because of an expired limitation period. See, we're dealing with historical claims, and for virtually all of them, if they were in the courts, they'd be statute barred. So they come to us. We heard oral history. We had a large number of historical documents. We had full and capable submissions from counsel for the claimant and the Crown. And I, as the presiding member, released a decision that's overly long, but addressed all of those complex issues. Now, the matter went to judicial review in the Federal Court of Appeal. The federal court, with respect, thought they were dealing with an appeal and not judicial review, and reversed my decision. I can tell you, I don't think any more of their decision than they do of mine. And there's an application for leave to the Supreme Court of Canada. Now, it's probably important that at some point one of these decisions gets to the Supreme Court of Canada. But looking at it from the claimant's perspective, of course, where do they get the money to engage in a judicial review in the Federal Court of Appeal, much less the Supreme Court of Canada? And they've filed their leave application, and of course we're watching that. But that's Williams Lake. There, of course, the Indigenous peoples there did not get a reserve until, about 30 years after others were allotted. And they were virtually homeless, having been dispossessed of their traditional village by settlers who were preempting the land that they routinely used as village sites and resource gathering places. That's the kind of claim we get.
I only have a minute left, so it's probably not a lot of time. I do note, so you say you received 76, they're in process. Is there a number that have not been submitted by virtue of you not having the capacity to deal with it, or is that the workload as that it's out there right now?
Well, claims entering our process are delayed due to the inability of the current complement to manage them. We're very heavy on case management because we want everybody to be ready by the time we get to a hearing date. Some claims are simply unassigned because there's absolutely no point assigning a claim to a judge who's already overloaded. So those languish. Claims that are active in the process get delayed due to our lack of resources.
Thank you, Justice Slade. The next question comes from Charlie Angus, please.
Well, thank you very much for your presence here. I want to ask just a couple of framing questions, then we can get into specifics. So we have claims branch, and we have the tribunal. So does claims branch decide what cases actually get to the tribunal, or are you able to make those decisions?
The claimants make that decision, Honourable Member. First, these claims have to go to the Minister, now the Minister of Indigenous Affairs and Northern Development, for a decision whether or not to accept the claim for negotiation. Now, the claims are reviewed by the specific claims branch, a department of that ministry, and they do their own research and then take advice from the Department of Justice. A recommendation is made to the minister. If the minister rejects the claim, they prefer the language does not accept, then it qualifies to come to the tribunal. If the claim is accepted and there's no resolution in 2 years, the claimant can bring the matter to the tribunal.
That's interesting. You know, in another life I worked on for a community in Quebec on their specific claims history, and people had been on those cases long before I came along, and they're still on them. A whole series of dubious and bogus land surrenders and expropriations and deals with trust funds, and this is very technical stuff. And just as in back then, you had to trust the Indian agent to have your interests, and there was actually in this community only one Indian agent ever fired, and he had advised the community not to support a surrender of land, and then he was found by the department to be very unacceptable in his post and the only one fired. And yet today, not to cast aspersions on the department, but they control the purse strings. They have a lot of power in a sense, because they're in a sense both the defendant and an adjudicator of the process, an overseer. We've seen major cuts to the research teams to be able to bring forward cases. Are you concerned on that we're going to be able to maintain the merits of historic, well-researched cases that can be credible if we don't have the funds and the research support to follow through?
Well, Mr. Angus, I am concerned. You know, the average life of claims that come to us based on a rejection, that is the life of that claim with the minister, is probably around 12 years. I've seen them go as long as 20. Rarely do we see one that has been in the process less than 5. So, you know, the claimants naturally, the composition of the communities change, the composition of the council of the First Nation changes. The delay works against justice.
Right.
And I think we'd have a lot more claims. In fact, by our calculation, there's at least 450 claims that would qualify to be brought before the tribunal. But the combination of a lack of funding, long delays with the specific claims branch, and kind of a loss of momentum, and the well-known problems facing the tribunal are likely preventing claims from being brought forward.
So then on the one hand, we have, for the people bringing forth claims, there's certainly been a lot of concerns about the lack of research capacity, and as you point out, being dragged out. the research teams leave. I mean, it's hard to maintain a case over 12 or 20 years. But in your case, we've not had the judges being able to get out and do the work as you've raised. Do you have within your tribunal the resources necessary to be able to, if you had the complement, are you fully able to respond to what potentially could come your way?
Yeah, good question. We're operating a very bare bones shop. And we've avoided adding staff when they would stay idle because of the lack of a full judicial complement. But as the judicial complement grows, we will need more staff. And our executive director, Stuart Campbell, who's here, I'm confident is taking the steps that are required to serve a more fulsome complement of members. But of course, it all takes time. We're now under the Administrative Tribunal Support Services of Canada, which provides services to 11 tribunals. By the way, we've lost our standalone service provider and now are under
To interrupt you there, being under the Administrative Tribunal Support Service of Canada, the Canadian Bar Association has raised concerns that these changes will have impacted judicial independence, particular having the Chief Administrator report directly to the Minister of Justice. So do you share any of those concerns?
those concerns originate with me.
I wondered where I got all that smart information. Maybe you can elaborate.
Well, first...
1 minute remaining, please.
Sorry? Yeah. Well, first, we're now, our legal counsel, Ms. Lombard, and we have three legal counsel now, are all technically employees of the ATSSC, which falls under the Department of Justice. It puts legal counsel into a very awkward position. Fortunately, our legal counsel know that their responsibilities are to the tribunal and not to the ATSSC, and stand firm on their resolve not to be conflicted. The difficulty, though, is that if we faced a challenge based on institutional bias, we may very well be found by a court to not offer up the appearance of independence that is required of a court-like adjudicative tribunal. That's a risk.
Thank you. The next question is coming from Rémi Massé, please.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for taking part in the activities of the committee.
I'll hold it there. Big ears.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for taking part in the activities of the committee. It's very much appreciated. I have to admit, first of all, that for someone who is professionally involved in the legal area, I can understand the various issues that have been presented, and I'm attempting to understand what the cause of these is and what particular solutions, what approaches might be taken in providing a solution. Can you explain to me what the main issues are and what the possible solutions are? I think you mentioned some of them, but I'd like to hear more.
Yes, thank you, Honourable Member. We provided a very thorough submission to the Minister's Special Representative, Minister Valcourt, in connection with a 5-year review that's called for by Section 40 of the Specific Claims Tribunal Act. The Special Representative, Dr. Pelletier, was good enough to come back to the tribunal after interviewing stakeholders, and he told us of their concerns and their ideas as to how our process may be improved. we were invited to make submissions on those, and I commend those submissions and Dr. Peltier's report, which I have never seen, to the members of this body. We talked about changes throughout the specific claims process that would establish for the tribunal a bigger role in the preliminary vetting of claims, but all the while leaving it in the minister's discretion whether or not to accept claims. We discussed a summary procedure for bringing claims forward that would depend on full disclosure by the specific claims branch. We talked about the appointment of prothonotary,s as they have in the federal court, that could make procedural decisions such that the judicial members don't have to carry the whole load. There's many other ideas in there in both the tribunal submission and the submission of the Assembly of First Nations to the special representative. The 5-year review is supposed to be concluded by October this year, and of course it's fallen to the current government to see that through. And the members of the tribunal stand ready to assist the minister in any way that we can to flesh out ideas on how to make our process more efficient, less costly, and more user-friendly.
Vous avez dans les notes.
In your statement, you made reference to the fact that you are not satisfied with the situation in which your mandate is being exercised, and you mentioned the fact that you were handicapped by the chronic lack of judges. For ordinary people like me, can you explain to me how the process of nomination of judges works? I'm quite pleased to see that the minister did give an answer to your request, and that very soon 3 judges will be appointed. I'm very happy to hear this, but can you explain to me how this appointment process works, and how can we explain the slowness of this process and the delays?
Well, of course, the process starts with the appointment of judges to the superior courts, as members of the tribunal are drawn from the courts, and hence thus far it's been limited to the 3 courts, British Columbia, Ontario, and Quebec. Now, to receive an appointment to the tribunal, we need volunteers. And of course, judges would like to know what they're getting themselves into. I'm not sure the decision, my decision to volunteer would have been made had I known what I was getting myself into, but then again, my spouse, who is Tsimshian, said I have to do it, so I guess I had to do it. And at the time, I was one of the few judges in the country with a long background in these matters. In any case, a judge will volunteer, and then it's up to his or her Chief Justice to nominate. And that, as I've mentioned, is a decision that will take account of the needs of the court. If there's a nomination, and we don't have many volunteers, so we don't have many nominations, we have 3, then it's for the Minister of Justice and the Minister of Indigenous Affairs to make a recommendation to Cabinet. And if Cabinet sees fit to approve a nominee as a member of the tribunal, then it will be made. It's a governor and council appointment. But thus far, over a period longer than 2 years, we've had nominations from Chief Justices, but no action. to get those to cabinet. And without that, it simply doesn't happen. Yeah.
Thank you. We're moving now to a round of 5-minute questions. These will move a little more quickly, and the first question is from David Yurdiga.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, we have a problem, and I believe the lack of resources is probably why we have backlog in the system. In a way, I understand that the tribunal currently has about 50 claims that are active. And how many claims are scheduled for a hearing this year?
I wouldn't want to speculate, but from my recollection, are we talking about the fiscal year or the calendar year?
Calendar year.
Okay. Since January, I would say no less than 10. And some of these hearings can span a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. They include oral history evidence hearings, expert witness hearings, as well as hearings on the merits of validity and compensation.
So thank you. In the present circumstances with the lack of funding, how much time would it be required to clear the current inventory of claims before the tribunal?
Well,
a guesstimate would be fine.
Well, with the current, if we have no more judges and all the claims stay with us, I don't know, 5 years. But of course, we're getting new claims and we're moving claims where there's been a hearing on validity that has found a valid claim into the compensation phase. So even with the 3 additional part-time members, it's going to take a long time to clear the existing backlog. We're going to need more judges. The other difficulty is that it's impossible to have a succession plan. We need another full-time member, at least one, in order that a successor to my position as chairperson can develop. And I only know of one judge who is prepared to commit for 5 years, Justice Todd Ducharme of the Ontario Superior Court, who I think would be an excellent successor. And he, by the way, is Métis, which, I think the tribunal would be well served by having diversity among its members. I'd like nothing more than to hand it off to Justice Ducharme, but he has to get appointed, and to get appointed, his Chief Justice has to release him, and thus far, Justice Heather Smith, Chief Justice, Ontario Superior Court, has not been prepared to do that. And of course, it's up to the Chief Justice, and they have to look after the demands of their court. But I would very much like to see Justice Ducharme on the tribunal. He's younger, very learned, very pragmatic, and I think it would be serve the interests of diversity if he were to join us. He's the only judge I know who's prepared to come on board full-time.
That becomes a problem when succession is not easy, to hand it off to the next chair. So is there a time frame you like to work with them before the torch is handed over?
I'm early in my second and final term, because under the Act you can only have 2, and besides, by the time this term is over, so am I, as a judge at least. So I'd like to see somebody take over in the middle of my term, and then I could continue to serve for the remainder of the 5 years, and perhaps take a little more time out west where my home is, and hear claims primarily out there. That would be a really good outcome for me personally, and I think for the tribunal.
Out of time. We're out of time, yeah. Really. Next question from Gary and Andesangri, please.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you all three for joining us this afternoon. I actually want to probe a little bit more. I know you mentioned the importance of the diversity of the judiciary, and it's an area that I know is something very important to our government, and want to make sure that the diversity that is Canada is represented in the judiciary overall. It's an area that I worked in extensively, but with particular emphasis on our Indigenous population. Do you currently have any members serving in the circuit that are of Indigenous background? And maybe you can speak, and I know you alluded to it, if you can maybe speak a bit more on on the importance of it and how we can ensure that there's representation on a very important issue that will confront the community more than anyone else.
Well, it would have to start, honourable member, with with a more diversity in the appointments to the courts, and because that's where we get our members. We do not have a member of Indigenous ancestry, and there are very few Superior Court judges who are of Indigenous descent, rather. Now, this is not a place for inexperienced judges. You really want tribunal members who have some experience as a judge, because you quickly learn as a judge how not to get run around by the antics of the parties and counsel, the sort of thing I used to engage in. So you want somebody who can bring the matter along and be somewhat forceful in doing so. So I think it's quite a challenge to get to a person of Indigenous descent onto the tribunal. First you need to be a judge, then you need to volunteer, then you need to be nominated, then you need to be appointed. I think it would give the claimant community better confidence that they're really going to be heard if there is diversity on the tribunal. I shouldn't pat myself on the back too much, but I can tell you, I think we've gained a pretty good reputation for being open and accessible and utterly transparent. And that's largely a consequence of our taking the hearings to the communities. Any thoughts on that?
Okay, si je peux
I would simply add that I fully agree with Justice Slade. We also looked at the situation to find out who might possibly be a member of the tribunal, but unfortunately, the problem is there are very few Aboriginals who are on the Superior Court, and it's very difficult to find judges who wish to be a member of this tribunal. Both Justice Slade and myself did have a practice as lawyers in Aboriginal law, so it was a matter that we were quite familiar with, but I would say that most judges, maybe there are more of them in British Columbia, but there are certainly not many in other provinces who are not familiar with this matter, and they're not very keen on embarking on this. If there were more judges then who were appointed to the Superior Courts of Aboriginal background, then of course this would be very encouraging and something we'd like to encourage.
30 seconds. So A quick question. In terms of the delays, procedural delays and disclosure delays, do you have the power to award costs? And if not, is that something that would be helpful in moving this along, especially with respect to dealing with the government?
We do have the power to award costs. There's been no awards of costs thus far. Generally, council, within the limits of their resources, have advanced matters as expeditiously as they're able.
We're right out of time there, I'm afraid. We have another committee coming in right on the heels of this committee, and we do have time for one question from Arnold Viersen, who's agreed to take a 4-minute question to allow us to turn over the room. Arnold.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here today. I really appreciate it. Your passion shows through, that's for sure. I guess one of the, I'm fairly new to this place and I'm trying to get a handle on a lot of things. One of the things that I'm just wondering, does the tribunal have like an end date? If you had all the resources, if you could bring these claimants down to, say you could get them done in 8 months or something like that, would there be an end date to your mandate? And I guess part of that question is how is the tribunal different from just regular court, essentially?
I think it unrealistic to consider that the tribunal is time limited. There are claims coming in to the minister still. The pace of that and the numbers are undiminished. Some of them will be accepted, others will not be accepted. Those qualify for the tribunal. Some will be accepted and there'll be no settlements. Those can come before the tribunal. As long as the claims keep coming to the minister, there'll be a role for the tribunal. I think that the whole system can be made far more efficient and less time-consuming. I've mentioned the 12-year average. Well, thanks to changes to government policy and our act, it's down to 3 years. But I can't conceive of why it would take 3 years for, with respect, the minister to get advice and arrive at a decision whether or not to accept a claim. We've addressed that in our submission. Personally, I think it should be 6 months. And it shouldn't be left to somebody other than a person with a judicial sort of perspective to decide whether or not the claim's going to be recommended for acceptance. And it certainly shouldn't be a situation where we are served as to our resource needs by an organization as capable as it has been, and Marie-France Pelletier is very good, but we shouldn't be under a branch of the Department of Justice where the defendant in our claims filed with us is always the Crown, and it's always represented by the Department of Justice.
One more minute.
And how would you differ from, say, just a regular court, essentially? Like if somebody has this claim, they're saying that the government of Canada is in breach of a treaty generally, why wouldn't they take us just to court, essentially?
Sorry, why would they?
Not sue us in court.
Largely because the limitation period will have expired.
Okay.
And of course, the Crown can decline to plead the limitation period, but I litigated these matters for 27 years, and not once did I see the Crown decline to plead limitations. So I don't anticipate a breakthrough in that regard.
Thank you so much, Justices Slade and Mainville and Ms. Lombard for joining us today, for traveling to Ottawa and sharing with us these important remarks. We're very grateful, and what you've told us, we'll put to good work here. Thanks again, and we are adjourned.